There are legends who change cinema, and then there are those who destroy themselves doing it. Marlon Brando was both. Behind his calm stare and quiet voice in The Godfather was a man already at war, with the studio, with his co-stars, and eventually with himself. What happened on that set didn't end when the cameras stopped. It haunted Brando for the rest of his life, turning admiration into bitterness and respect into silence. The fall of a genius. Before he ever became Don Vito Corleone, Marlon Brando had already reinvented what it meant to be an actor. When he walked onto Broadway in 1947 for A Streetcar Named Desire, audiences saw something they'd never seen before, acting that didn't feel like acting. He sweated, shouted, and moved with raw, dangerous truth. By the time he screamed, "Stella!" across the stage, a new kind of performance had been born. Hollywood rushed to claim him. On the Waterfront in 1954 earned him his first Oscar, and for a brief moment, he was the golden boy, handsome, rebellious, the future of film. But success only magnified his defiance. On set, he refused direction, rewrote dialogue, and demanded endless takes. By the late 1950s, his genius was inseparable from chaos. When he filmed Mutiny on the Bounty in 1962, the production spiraled into one of the costliest disasters of its time, 10 months behind schedule and $6 million over budget. Uncontrollable, the studios called him, and the label stuck. By the mid-1960s, Brando's name meant risk. His movies flopped, his temper grew, and the industry that once worshipped him quietly closed its doors. He was 47 and nearly unemployable. The man once hailed as the greatest actor alive was suddenly toxic. That's when Francis Ford Coppola came along, a young director with more faith than sense. In 1971, Coppola fought for Brando when no one else would. Paramount executives flat out refused. They said Brando was finished, unreliable, impossible to insure. But Coppola saw something that others didn't. The broken pride beneath the wreckage, the sadness that could give birth to a legend. Brando didn't make it easy. Coppola had to beg him to do a screen test, an act most aging stars would find humiliating. But Brando surprised everyone. He darkened his blonde hair with shoe polish, stuffed Kleenex into his cheeks, and transformed himself into an old man with a raspy, haunted voice. In a few minutes, he wasn't Marlon Brando anymore. He was Vito Corleone. Paramount executives who had sworn he'd never appear in the film were stunned into silence. Yet the victory came with a price. The studio offered him a fraction of his usual salary, just $50,000, and demanded he put up a $1 million bond guaranteeing good behavior. For a man once treated as royalty, it was a public humiliation. Brando accepted, but inside, resentment festered. He would give them a masterpiece, but he would never forgive the people who made him crawl back to earn it. Coppola's battle to cast Al Pacino only deepened Brando's mistrust. The studio wanted a big name, Redford, Beatty, Nicholson, but Coppola insisted on the unknown stage actor with dark eyes and quiet intensity. When Pacino finally won the role of Michael Corleone, Brando felt both curiosity and suspicion. He saw in Pacino a younger version of himself, talented, hungry, and already being positioned as the future. To a man terrified of being replaced, that was the beginning of a silent rivalry that would outlive the film itself. The battle for The Godfather. When production began in March 1971, the tension was already thick. Coppola had his dream cast, but Paramount executives were still watching with suspicion, waiting for Brando to explode. For them, The Godfather wasn't art, it was a risk. For Brando, it was revenge. He arrived on set with a quiet arrogance that unsettled everyone. He wouldn't memorize his lines, insisting that memorized words sound fake. Instead, he had cue cards taped under lamps, written on walls, even stuck to actors' foreheads. It infuriated his co-stars. Robert Duvall, who played Tom Hagen, thought it was disrespectful. James Caan, always blunt, called it typical Brando crap. But Coppola defended him, because somehow it worked. Brando's words flowed naturally, as if he were thinking them for the first time. The first week was a disaster. The Corleone house set wasn't even finished, costing the studio $40,000 a day in delays. Coppola was under immense pressure, and every mistake felt like a nail in his coffin. But then, on a random morning, a stray cat wandered onto the set. Without warning, Brando picked it up and began petting it during the opening scene. The animal wasn't in the script, but that moment, Vito Corleone calmly stroking a cat while ordering violence, became one of the most iconic images in film history. Everyone saw it then. This man, as unpredictable as he was infuriating, still had the magic. But harmony was short-lived. Brando's behavior kept the cast on edge. Al Pacino, a young unknown at the time, was intimidated by him. During the hospital scene, Pacino was told to sit beside Brando, who was eating chicken cacciatore with his bare hands, smearing sauce across the white sheets, while talking as if nothing was wrong. Pacino later said he couldn't focus on anything except the red stains spreading around them. That surreal moment defined their relationship, awe and discomfort, reverence and distance. Still, Brando recognized something in Pacino, that same quiet fire he once had in his 20s. It frightened him. Coppola began to shape the story around Michael Corleone, the reluctant son turned ruthless boss. The film's emotional center was shifting, and Brando noticed. The man once hailed as the film's anchor was suddenly watching a newcomer steal the light. James Caan, too, got under his skin. Brando liked Caan's energy, the jokes, the brash confidence, but hated his recklessness. Caan once said, "I was his clown. I'd make him laugh between takes." Brando smiled, but behind the laughter, he kept his guard up. He had seen too many young actors rise by imitating him, only to forget his name later. His most complicated relationship, however, was with Robert Duvall. They respected each other's talent, but despised each other's habits. Duvall saw Brando as lazy. Brando saw Duvall as rigid. Their quiet feud spilled into subtle power games on set. Forgotten lines, exaggerated pauses, tiny moments of defiance caught on film forever. Coppola often found himself playing peacemaker, trying to hold the fragile family together while the fictional one fell apart on screen. And the irony wasn't lost on anyone. Behind the camera, they were living the same story they were telling: loyalty, betrayal, and the slow decay of trust. As the months dragged on, the film began to feel like a war, one fought with words, egos, and exhaustion. By the end of shooting, Brando had stopped speaking to several cast members entirely. He'd done his job. He'd given them what they wanted. But deep down, something inside him had broken again. He didn't just play Don Corleone, he became him. A man who loved his family but never trusted them. War on set and the seeds of resentment. When filming wrapped, the cast thought the storm was over. But for Marlon Brando, it was only beginning. The movie was finished, but his grudges were not. He was furious that Paramount and Coppola had limited his control. He believed he had carried the film, that without his name, no one would have cared. Yet as The Godfather neared release, he realized the attention wasn't on him anymore. It was on Al Pacino. The young actor he had barely spoken to was suddenly being called the new Brando. That phrase haunted him. At first, Brando brushed it off, telling interviewers he was happy to see fresh talent. But in private, he complained that Coppola had betrayed him by shifting the story's focus from Vito to Michael. He couldn't stand watching Pacino's rise. Each headline praising the quiet power of the son felt like a personal insult. Brando, who had fought his whole life to be taken seriously again, now saw the spotlight slipping away. When The Godfather premiered in March 1972, the world went silent, and then exploded. The film shattered box office records, earning over $250 million, the equivalent of $1.5 billion today. Brando's performance as Don Vito Corleone was hailed as legendary. But success didn't soften him, it hardened him. The Academy Award for Best Actor seemed inevitable, yet when he won, he refused to accept it. He sent a Native American activist, Sacheen Littlefeather, to the ceremony in his place. Dressed in Apache regalia, she declined the Oscar on his behalf and read a message condemning Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans. The room fell into chaos. Some applauded, others booed, and John Wayne had to be restrained from storming the stage. Brando's protest divided the industry. To some, it was courageous, to others, a slap in the face. But for his co-stars, it was something else entirely. A betrayal of the film itself. Pacino, Duvall, and Caan had risked their careers to make The Godfather, only to watch its most famous actor turn the moment of triumph into controversy. Duvall later said the incident embarrassed everyone. He made it about himself, he admitted. The fallout was immediate. Brando's relationships with his castmates fractured completely. Invitations to reunions went unanswered. Phone calls weren't returned. Even Coppola stopped trying to reach out. The man who had once saved Brando's career now felt used and abandoned. Betrayal after glory. In the years after The Godfather, the silence between Marlon Brando and his co-stars became deafening. What had started as creative tension turned into something deeper, quiet hostility mixed with pride. Al Pacino was the first to feel it. He had idolized Brando, studied his work, even patterned some of his early performances after him. But when The Godfather Part II came out in 1974, Pacino became the face of the saga. Brando's Vito Corleone had died in the first film, and Michael Corleone's transformation into a ruthless leader stole the world's attention. Critics called Pacino's performance masterful, and for Brando, it was salt in an open wound. In a 1979 interview with Playboy, Brando finally let his bitterness show. When asked about Pacino, he said, "He's a good actor, but not a great one." It was a cold dismissal from a man Pacino once worshipped. The younger actor said nothing publicly, but years later, he admitted the comment had hurt. "Marlon was a giant," Pacino said quietly, "but his criticism didn't define me." Robert Duvall fared no better. During Apocalypse Now in 1979, when both worked again under Francis Ford Coppola, Duvall called Brando's behavior disruptive and pointless. Brando had arrived overweight and unprepared, having refused to read the script or learn his lines. Coppola, already on the verge of collapse, was devastated. Brando improvised endlessly, demanded extra pay, and even forced changes to his dialogue. The production nearly fell apart, and when it was over, Duvall swore he would never work with him again. James Caan, once Brando's on-set friend, later admitted he felt used. "I was his clown," Caan recalled. "I made him laugh between takes, but that was it." Brando's warmth during The Godfather had faded into something sharper: sarcasm, dismissal, indifference. The man who once bonded with his cast over long conversations now treated them as strangers. By the 1980s, Brando had cut off nearly everyone from that chapter of his life. He skipped the film's 10th anniversary reunion in 1982. Pacino, Duvall, and Talia Shire attended. Brando stayed home. When asked why, he said the celebration was just another excuse for people to make money off my name. Behind his words was something more painful: resentment that the movie had made everyone else immortal too. The cold years. By the mid-1980s, Marlon Brando had turned his back on Hollywood, and Hollywood had quietly done the same to him. The man who once changed acting forever now lived behind walls, far from the cameras, surrounded by the silence he claimed to want but could never bear. He rarely spoke of The Godfather, and when he did, it was with a mixture of pride and regret. In interviews, he dismissed it as just another job, pretending it didn't matter. But friends said he watched the film alone sometimes, the scene of Vito playing with his grandson in the garden, and would sit in silence for long minutes afterward. The world, meanwhile, had moved on. Pacino became a global icon, Duvall an award-winning actor, and Coppola a legend. Brando's career, once revived by The Godfather, began to fade again. He appeared in Last Tango in Paris, Superman, and later, The Strange Troubled Apocalypse Now, where his erratic behavior nearly broke Coppola's spirit. By the 1990s, he was a recluse, surfacing occasionally in eccentric interviews or brief cameos. But even in isolation, controversy followed him. His personal life became a headline machine: 11 children, 3 marriages, and endless rumors of affairs. In 2018, years after his death, Quincy Jones reignited an old Hollywood secret, claiming Brando had slept with comedian Richard Pryor and even musician Marvin Gaye. Brando's family denied it. Pryor's widow confirmed it. The truth didn't matter. The myth did. Brando had always blurred the line between scandal and sincerity. When asked about his reputation, he shrugged, "I've lived a life of my own making. If they don't like it, that's their problem." But behind the defiance was exhaustion. The last decades of his life were marked by tragedy: lawsuits, weight gain, and the 1990 death of his daughter Cheyenne, who took her own life after her boyfriend's murder. Friends said it broke something in him that never healed. He stopped acting almost entirely, spending his final years in Beverly Hills, writing letters and speaking to few. He never reconciled with his Godfather co-stars. When James Caan died in 2022, people revisited their shared history, but there was no word from Brando's family. Al Pacino once said that he wished he could have had one real conversation with Brando. Not as actors, just as men. It never happened. In 2004, Marlon Brando died at age 80. His ashes were scattered in Tahiti and Death Valley, 2 places as isolated as he had become. Even in death, he remained an enigma, the man who gave life to the most powerful patriarch in cinema, yet died estranged from his own family of artists. He had created Vito Corleone, a man who built his empire on loyalty, then lost it to betrayal. And in a tragic mirror of art imitating life, Marlon Brando lived and died the same way. In the end, Marlon Brando changed acting forever, but it cost him every friendship he made along the way. The man who once breathed life into Don Vito Corleone spent his final years like the character himself, surrounded by silence, haunted by memories, and unable to forgive the family that made him immortal. He had the world in his hands, yet he could never hold on to peace. Do you think Marlon Brando was a misunderstood genius, or a man destroyed by his own pride? Tell us what you think in the comments below. And if you want to see more stories about Hollywood's most complicated legends, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.